The photograph was found by accident, buried among ledgers in a wooden crate that smelled of coal and cedar oil. It was small, no larger than a hand, the kind of picture that might have once been pinned to a wall or kept inside a drawer until the memory it carried faded into myth. The label on the envelope read, Camp School No. 4, Monongalia County, March 1911. The archivist who discovered it did not expect much. Most of the mining records from that period were brittle and dull, but the moment he drew the photograph into the light, something in the air shifted. It was as if the room, the dust, even the hum of the old ceiling fan paused to listen. The photograph showed 4 boys at a wooden desk, sunlight leaking through a single window behind them. The walls were made of pine boards, rough and unpainted, the grain marked by the passage of 100 winters. The boys sat stiffly, their hands folded or clasping their knees, as if warned not to move. Their collars were high, their boots caked with dry mud. The smallest one, seated nearest the lens, held a slate across his lap. On it, written in chalk, was a single name, John. It was that unfinished line, the ellipsis, that drew the archivist in. Every other detail in the image could be explained by history or circumstance, but that hesitation, that silence caught in chalk, was something else. The boy's eyes were steady, though tired. They looked at the camera not with curiosity or fear, but with a kind of weary understanding, as though he already knew what the photograph would become, a fragment without an ending. The other 3 boys faced the lens obediently. The eldest's brow was furrowed in concentration. The one in the center blinked at the flash. The third appeared distracted by something outside the frame, but the smallest, John, sat perfectly still. Behind him, the shadow of an adult loomed faintly against the blackboard. Long, narrow, and uncertain. The archivist examined the back of the photo. There was a faint pencil mark, almost erased, that read, 4 pupils present, 1 missing. Beneath that, another note, smaller and shakier, he cannot speak it. He frowned. It was not uncommon for photographs of rural schools to carry notes like, 1 absent, or missing pupil. Records were spotty, and illness frequent, but this sounded different, personal. He placed the photo under a magnifying glass, tracing the texture of the paper. Around the edges, small fibers had begun to fray, yet the image itself remained crisp. The light on the boy's face was too perfect to be chance. It seemed almost deliberate, as though whoever took the photograph had centered him for a reason. Outside the archive, the wind rattled the old courthouse windows. The archivist checked the clock. Past 6. He should have gone home hours ago, but he couldn't leave it. The photograph seemed to vibrate faintly beneath the glass, the way heat shimmers above coal. He searched the census records from that year. 3 Johns in the district, John Barrett 9, John Carter 8, John Miller 10. Only one of them, Miller, was listed as attending the camp school that spring. His guardian, Anna Miller, widow. Occupation, none. He closed the ledger, the paper creaking like old wood. The mine at Dunlow Hollow. He remembered hearing of it once, a place swallowed by fire and collapse. Half the camp had been evacuated that winter. The rest, he recalled vaguely, never left. He turned the photograph back toward the lamplight. Behind the boys, the blackboard bore faint marks, chalk letters half erased. Lesson 2, Sound and Word. Below it, a single equation, 1 + 1 erg. The answer was missing. So was the teacher. Only that thin shadow remained, the outline of a man bending forward, arm extended as if frozen mid-instruction. That night, the archivist dreamt of the photograph. In the dream, the classroom was alive again. The faint scratch of chalk, the smell of oil lamps and damp wool. He saw the 4 boys as they were, but they breathed, shifted, blinked. The smallest, John, raised his slate to the camera, and when he did, the word changed. It no longer said John. The letters rearranged themselves, curling and fading until only one word remained, home. He woke before dawn, his pulse unsteady. His apartment was quiet, except for the rain. He rose, lit a candle, and found his journal. In it, he wrote, certain images refuse to remain still. They hold the memory of something unfinished. He arrived early to the archive the next morning, intent on examining the negative, if it still existed. But the box labeled Camp School No. 4 was empty. The photograph was gone. Only a trace of black dust remained where it had lain. He called the night clerk, who swore no one had entered. The security lock had not been broken. Still, he searched every drawer, every envelope. Nothing. When he finally sat down, exhausted, a strange impulse made him open his palm. Across his skin, faint white dust clung in the pattern of 3 dots. He brushed them away and told himself it was coincidence. That afternoon, he found a reference in an old newspaper archive, the Monongalia Gazette, dated March 5, 1911. Explosion at Dunlow Hollow Mine. 4 men unaccounted for after ignition of gas pocket in lower shaft. Among the missing, 1 child believed to have wandered near the entrance. The name was not listed. He leaned back, the chair creaking. The air smelled faintly of smoke, though the building's windows were closed. He turned off the lamp, but the after-image of the boy's face remained imprinted on his vision. The hollow eyes, the slate, the name cut short. In the following days, he tried to forget it, but the photograph refused to be forgotten. It appeared in his thoughts when he sorted other collections, when he passed the shelves, when he closed his eyes at night. Sometimes he could hear it, the scratch of chalk on wood, faint but steady. One evening, when the power flickered during a storm, he lit a lantern and sat at his desk. The light cast moving shadows across the wall. In that glow, he saw it again, the shape of the classroom, the walls, the desks, the faint shimmer of dust in the air. For a moment, he felt certain that if he reached forward, his hand would touch splintered wood. Then faintly, a knock. He froze. The sound came from behind the filing cabinets. A second knock, softer. He rose, lantern in hand, and pulled one cabinet aside. Behind it, the wall was discolored, and there, pressed into the gap between boards, was a folded piece of paper. It was an old attendance sheet. The header read, Camp School Number 4. Beneath it, 4 names were listed: Edward, Samuel, Luke, and John. Next to John's name, someone had drawn a cross in red ink. The remarks column said only, unable to answer when called. The archivist exhaled slowly. The handwriting was the same as on the back of the photograph. The same sharp angles, the same faint tremor. Mr. Alden's. He refolded the paper, slid it into an envelope, and left for the night. But when he reached the door, he stopped. His reflection in the glass pane stared back, pale and strained. And in the faint reflection behind him, 4 small figures sat at a wooden desk, motionless, their outlines blurred by shadow. He turned sharply. Nothing there, only the shelves, the lantern's flicker, but the smell of chalk hung in the air. That night, he dreamed again. The classroom was darker this time, the air thick with dust. He could hear the teacher's voice, muffled, patient. Say your name, boy. Silence. Write it then. A slow scratching sound, then a whisper, thin as breath. I can't. The chalk fell. When he awoke, the candle beside his bed had burned to the base. Wax spilled across the wood. In its puddle, faintly visible where the wax had cooled, was a single word written in his own handwriting, though he did not remember writing it. Listen. He closed the journal, his hands trembling. Some stories, he thought, do not belong to the living. They simply wait for someone patient enough to hear them. And somewhere beyond the reach of his understanding, the boy in the photograph waited still, holding a name he could not speak. Before it became a photograph, it was a morning like any other in Dunlow Hollow, a hollow that sat hidden in the curve of West Virginia's spine, its breath the sigh of coal dust and mist. The year was 1911, and winter still lingered like a guest who would not leave. The river below the ridge was half frozen, carrying bits of ash from the mine upstream, and the sound of pickaxes echoed from dawn until dusk, as if the mountain itself had a pulse that refused to stop beating. The schoolhouse had once been a storage shed for mining tools. It leaned slightly east as though bowing toward the men who passed every morning, their lanterns bobbing down the path like a procession of tired stars. Inside, the boards were warped from moisture, and the single stove rattled when the wind rose. There was no flag, no bell, only a rusted horseshoe nailed above the door, for luck or habit. The teacher was named Mr. Alden. He was tall, lean, with a gray beard that looked like it belonged to a man much older than his 40 years. His hands were always chalk-dusted. Even when he wiped them clean, a trace remained. He kept to himself, eating lunch alone by the window, reading a tattered Bible, though no one had ever seen him pray. He had come from Charleston 2 winters earlier, sent by the state to teach the miners' children, boys who could barely keep their eyes open after nights spent hauling coal buckets or tending fires for their mothers. That morning, 4 boys were present. Edward, the eldest, with his father's heavy jaw and a temper that always simmered beneath the surface. Samuel, thin as a reed, who had lost his father to a cave-in and still carried the tremor of that sound in his bones. Luke, who whistled through his teeth whenever he worked sums, and whose laughter could momentarily lift the weight of the room. And then there was John, the smallest, the quietest, the one who often seemed to drift between here and somewhere else entirely. John's mother had come from across the ridge the previous fall. She was pale and soft-spoken, wearing a coat 2 sizes too large and gloves she never removed, even indoors. She told Mr. Alden her husband had died in a mining accident in a different county, though she never said which one. The boy doesn't talk much, she said, pressing a small slate into his hands, but he listens. And listen he did. John's silence was not stubbornness. It was as if words cost him something the others could not see. He would trace letters in chalk with such care that it seemed like prayer. Sometimes when he finished writing, he would pause and stare at the word as though expecting it to move. The other boys tried to draw him out. "You scared of the teacher?" Luke teased once, tossing a crumpled paper at him. John only blinked and looked away. Edward muttered, "He's just strange. Talks to himself. I seen him, but it wasn't quite true." John didn't talk to himself. He listened to something else, something the others could not hear. One morning, as snow hissed against the windows, Mr. Alden asked the boys to recite their names for the attendance roll. One by one they spoke. Edward, Samuel, Luke, voices echoing softly in the wooden room. When it was John's turn, silence followed. Alden looked up. "Your name, son?" The boy hesitated. He held the slate against his chest, chalk trembling in his hand. Slowly he wrote 3 letters, J-O-H, and stopped. "Finish it," Alden urged gently. "Your full name." The boy looked at him, eyes wide, unblinking. His lips parted, but no sound came. For a heartbeat, Alden thought he saw the boy's breath cloud into a faint shape, a wisp, a whisper, but then it was gone. A gust of wind rattled the walls. The stove coughed. Alden crossed the room, took the slate, and placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "That's all right," he murmured. "We'll try again tomorrow." The other boys said nothing. Edward stared at his boots. Luke bit his lip. Samuel crossed himself quietly when Alden turned away. That night, after the children had gone, Alden lingered by the stove, reading by lantern light. He found the boy's slate still resting on the desk. When he lifted it, he noticed faint indentations beneath the name, as though another word had once been written there, then erased. He tilted it toward the light, trying to read the grooves. It looked like a second name, 5 letters, maybe 6, but the chalk dust was smeared, untraceable. He brushed it clean and set it back down. Yet when he turned to leave, the faintest noise made him stop, a tapping, soft and regular, from beneath the floorboards. He knelt, listening. Tap, pause, tap, tap, pause. It sounded almost like someone writing. When he lifted the lantern closer to the floor, the sound stopped. He waited. Nothing, just the sigh of wind through the cracks. He went home uneasy. That night he dreamed of a voice calling from the woods beyond his cabin. It was a child's voice, familiar yet far. "I can't say it," the voice whispered. "She won't let me." He woke before dawn, drenched in cold sweat. The next day, John did not come to class. His mother appeared instead, standing at the doorway as the other boys recited. Her eyes were ringed dark, her skin drawn tight. "He's ill," she said simply. "Fever." Alden nodded. "Tell him he can rest. We'll catch him up next week." But a week passed, then 2, and John did not return. His mother came once more, bringing a folded paper. "He wrote this," she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "He wanted you to have it." Alden unfolded the paper that evening. It was blank except for faint gray smudges like fingerprints. When he held it near the lamp, the soot shimmered into faint lines, J-O-H, and beneath it, so faint he almost missed it, a single word scratched in pencil, home. He closed the paper carefully, heart pounding. That night, a fire broke out in the lower shaft of the mine. The sky above Dunlow Hollow glowed red, and the air smelled of iron and smoke. The miners worked through the dark, hauling buckets of water from the river, shouting names over the roar. By morning, the fire had swallowed the entrance. The superintendent sealed the shaft and declared it lost. The next day, word spread that John's mother was gone. Her cabin stood empty, door ajar, bed unmade. On the table sat a cup of tea gone cold and a folded handkerchief with the initials A.M. stitched into the corner, Anna Miller. No trace of her or the boy was ever found. For a while, the school continued. The boys returned to their desks, though the air felt heavier, quieter. The name John was still on the attendance roll, unmarked, as though no one dared erase it. Alden kept his voice steady during lessons, but his eyes often drifted to the empty seat by the window. The sunlight there always seemed dimmer. One afternoon, as he wiped the board clean, he noticed new writing faintly etched into the wood beneath the chalk dust. It was not from his hand. The letters were uneven. Hurried, John, and beneath it, in smaller scrawl, "She's waiting." He froze. Outside, the wind rose, carrying the faint sound of shifting earth, the deep groan of the sealed shaft beyond the ridge. He tried to convince himself it was nothing but the mountain settling, but the tapping returned that night beneath his cabin floor, the same rhythm as before. 3 taps, pause, 3 more. Days later, when the state photographer came through to document the schools, Alden arranged the remaining boys for the picture. The 4th seat, John's, was left empty at first, but the photographer insisted on symmetry. "Place someone there," he said. "The camera doesn't like gaps." Alden hesitated, then nodded. "Sit there, Luke." But before Luke could move, the door creaked open. A gust of cold air swept in, and for a heartbeat, Alden swore he saw a small figure in the threshold, the shape of a boy, pale, expressionless, his hands folded around a slate. "Who's that?" the photographer asked, startled. Alden blinked. The doorway was empty again. No one, he said quietly. Let's begin. The flash burst. The room filled with light. Later, when the plate was developed, there were 4 boys at the desk, but Luke swore he never sat there. When the photograph was taken, no one could have guessed it would one day become a riddle that time itself could not answer. The year had already been cruel. The fire that sealed the mine still haunted the valley. The mountain no longer echoed with picks and voices, only with wind. By the time the smoke cleared, half the families had left Dunlow Hollow. Those who stayed did not speak of the fire. They said the mountain was better left to sleep. But silence has a way of holding its breath until someone dares to listen. Mr. Alden stayed. The state forgot to reassign him, and the superintendent who might have sent him away had died in the collapse. So he remained, a teacher without a class, in a schoolroom built for children who no longer came. He wrote to the county twice a month, requests for supplies, for payment, for instruction, but no replies came. The letters vanished into the post like stones into a well. He still taught out of habit more than hope. Each morning he opened the door, lit the stove, and wrote the date on the blackboard. Monday, March 13th, 1911. Then he waited. Sometimes a stray boy from the camps would wander in for an hour, but mostly it was just him. And yet he always left one desk empty, the one near the window. He began keeping a journal. The early entries were dull, weather reports, lists of visitors, inventories of chalk and paper. But gradually something else crept in. The handwriting changed, tightening with unease. March 20th. Heard tapping again. Same rhythm. 3 and 3. Thought it was a woodpecker, until it came from inside the wall. March 22nd. Found a child's slate beneath the floor. Edges scorched. The name John etched faintly, not in chalk but scratched by something sharp. March 25th. Dreamed of the classroom full again. The light was wrong. I could not see their faces, only the outlines. 4 boys, 1 missing. By April, he stopped writing dates altogether. The entries became fragments. He's not gone. The name won't stay erased. She's calling from the tunnel. Locals who passed the school at night said they sometimes saw light through the window, a dull orange glow, like the reflection of fire. Others swore they heard faint singing, a child's voice carrying on the wind. No one went close enough to check. One stormy evening, Alden walked to the mine. The shaft had been sealed months before with heavy planks and tar, but the boards had begun to split. The air that drifted out was warm, smelling faintly of iron and damp earth. He stood there in the rain, lantern shaking in his hand. A sound rose from deep below, steady, deliberate. 3 taps, pause, 3 more. He called out once, his voice echoing back at him, hollow. When silence returned, he whispered the boy's name, John. The wind shifted. Somewhere beneath his boots, the mountain sighed. When he returned to the schoolhouse that night, something was waiting for him. The desks had been moved, 4 of them, arranged neatly before the blackboard. On each desk lay a single object, a feather pen, a folded paper, a tin lunch pail, and on the last one, a slate. The slate bore a word written in white chalk so faint it looked like frost. Listen. Alden sank into his chair, hands trembling. Who's there? He called. The room answered with the creak of its own boards. The lantern flame flickered, bent sideways by a draft that shouldn't have been there. He stood, crossed the room, and touched the blackboard. It was cold. Beneath the chalk dust, grooves ran deep into the wood, marks left by fingernails or something harder. He traced them with his fingertip. They formed letters, uneven but deliberate. Mother. The chalk fell from the ledge and rolled to his feet. He left that night with his lantern still burning. He did not lock the door. No one saw him again after that. Weeks later, a traveling photographer arrived from Charleston, part of a state survey documenting rural schools. The superintendent's office in Fairmont had given him Alden's name as the local contact. When he reached Dunlow Hollow, he found the town nearly deserted and the mine entrance half buried by landslide. Still, he followed the dirt road that curved along the ridge until he saw the schoolhouse, leaning, window cracked, smoke rising faintly from its chimney. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with the smell of old ash. Dust coated the desks. On the wall, a line of chalk still stretched across the blackboard. Lesson 2, sound and word. But the last word had been half erased, leaving only sound and... He set up his camera. There was beauty, even in decay. He adjusted the lens, framed the room, and took a single photograph. The flash startled a few sparrows from the rafters. When he lowered the camera, he thought he saw movement in the corner. A small boy seated at the last desk, hands folded over a slate. But when he blinked, the seat was empty again. He developed the image that night at the boarding house. It showed what he expected. 4 desks, sunlight streaming through the window, the blackboard faint in the background. But on the last desk, faint and almost transparent, was the outline of a hand holding a small slate. He leaned closer, breath fogging the glass. There were letters on the slate, just visible beneath the light. J-O He rubbed his eyes. When he looked again, they were gone. The next morning, he delivered the plate to the superintendent's office and left town. He would later note in his travel diary, "Dunlow Hollow feels wrong. The mountain breathes at night." Years passed. The photograph became another artifact filed away, catalogued, forgotten. Until, in a different century, an archivist stumbled upon it again and felt the same pull, the same weight in his chest. It was no coincidence that he too bore the name John. He discovered this one evening while reviewing his own personnel file. His full name, printed in black ink across the page, Jonathan M. Alden. The initial froze him. He had never connected it before. The echo of the teacher's name, the shared middle letter, the hollow between them. He began to dream of the classroom more often. It came to him as it must have come to the teacher, the same angle of light, the same smell of smoke. He could hear the children whispering now, words just beyond recognition. He would wake with chalk dust beneath his nails. One night, unable to bear it, he returned to Dunlow Hollow. The drive took 4 hours through twisting mountain roads. When he reached the site, the forest had reclaimed almost everything. Only the stone foundation of the school remained, half hidden under vines. He stood in the clearing, the air thick with humidity. Fireflies blinked like dying embers. Somewhere in the dark, an owl called once, then fell silent. He knelt where the desks might have been. Beneath a layer of moss, his hand brushed something smooth, a fragment of slate. He lifted it carefully. On its surface, carved deep, were 3 words. He finished it. The sky shuddered with thunder. He turned the slate over. On the other side, a single name was etched with painful precision, John M. He dropped it. The sound rang too loudly, as though the earth beneath had a hollow space waiting for it to fall. As he backed away, he saw light flickering through the trees. For a heartbeat, the schoolhouse was whole again, windows glowing, shadows of 4 children inside. The boy by the window turned and raised his slate. Even from that distance, the archivist could read it. I remember. The vision vanished with the lightning. By dawn, the rain had erased his footprints. He never spoke of that night. But a week later, the archive where he worked received an anonymous envelope containing a photograph. Sepia, creased, edges scorched. It showed 4 boys at a wooden desk. On the back, in faded handwriting, "Returned home, February 1911. The archivist never returned to work. His apartment was found empty, his journals stacked neatly on the table. The last entry read, "He was never lost, he was waiting," and beneath it, a line of chalk drawn across the page, ending in 3 dots. The first snow of November came early that year, falling like ash over the hollow. By then, almost no one remembered the name of the school, or the teacher, or the children who had once gathered there. The mine was a scar sealed beneath the earth, its entrance buried, its story buried deeper still. But memory, like coal, burns long after it's been forgotten. The archivist, John Alden, stood at the edge of the ridge where the school once stood. The photograph lay between his hands, trembling slightly in the wind. He had found it again, not through logic or record, but through instinct, or perhaps it had found him. The edges were curling now, the sepia tones deepened by age. The 4 boys stared up at him from across a century. Behind them, that ghostly outline of a teacher on the blackboard, his own name whispered through time. For weeks after his return from the hollow, he had tried to convince himself that what he saw that night was nothing but exhaustion, a trick of darkness, imagination, grief. But the evidence kept returning. Chalk dust on his desk, though he hadn't used any. The faint scent of oil lamp smoke in his apartment. And once, when he left his office late, he found the lights still on in the archive room where the photo was kept. Inside, the air was colder than the hallway. On the table, someone had written a single word on a scrap of paper: "Stay." He burned the paper that same night, but the ash formed shapes that looked like letters. He stopped sleeping. Each night, he dreamed of the same thing: the schoolhouse fully restored, the desks neatly aligned, the air golden with dust motes. He walked down the aisle between them, the floorboards groaning beneath his feet. On the blackboard, words appeared on their own, phrases half remembered from the journal of Mr. Alden, the teacher who shared his name. He listens, he learns, he remembers, and at the back of the room the boy sat again, slate in hand, lips moving silently. "Say it," the dream version of himself would whisper. "Say your name." The boy would look up, eyes gray as fog, and the world around them would flicker, the desks turning to stone, the chalkboard splitting like glass. Then a voice, not his own, a woman's voice, soft as dust. "He doesn't belong to you." That was when he always woke. It went on for nights until his waking life began to feel like the dream. He would find himself walking toward the archive with no memory of leaving his apartment. He began to see movement in the corners of rooms, reflections where there should be none. Once, while reviewing another collection of photographs, he caught sight of himself in the glass, his posture wrong, his head tilted at an unnatural angle, as if the reflection were posing differently from the man observing it. That same evening, a colleague found him in the record room, standing motionless, holding the photograph against the window. "Are you all right?" she asked. He smiled faintly, though his eyes looked elsewhere. "It's strange," he said. "When the light hits it right, it feels like they're breathing." The colleague left uneasily. By December, he began to write again, not in reports or letters, but in fragments scrawled across the margins of old documents, sentences that trailed off like broken lines of poetry. They never left. "I was there before. The silence has shape." The handwriting grew more erratic each day. On the night the power failed, the security guard found him still in the archive, surrounded by candles. He was studying the photograph again, his breath fogging the glass. The guard called out, but he didn't answer. The man's eyes were fixed on the boy's slate. "He's almost done," John whispered, voice thin. "He's finishing it." The guard called his name once more. When the archivist finally turned, his expression was calm, almost relieved. "It's not about the name," he said softly. "It's about remembering." He left the building and walked into the snow. The next morning, the photograph was gone. In its place on the table lay a clean slate. Its surface was blank except for one faint line scratched near the bottom. 3 letters, J-O-H. The curator ordered the room sealed. The event was never mentioned publicly. But stories have a way of surviving even without permission. Years later, when the building was converted into a local museum, visitors reported strange occurrences. The room that once housed the archives always felt colder. Chalk dust appeared on the floor, though no blackboards remained. And sometimes, near closing time, a faint tapping echoed against the walls. 3 slow beats, then 3 more. The new curator, a woman named Evelyn Hart, dismissed the rumors as local superstition. But one evening, while closing up alone, she found an envelope resting on the desk. It was old, its paper yellowed, sealed with wax that had long since cracked. Her name was written on the front in looping cursive. Inside, a single photograph. She gasped. It showed 4 boys at a wooden desk, the light falling perfectly across their faces. The smallest boy sat at the front, holding a slate. On it, written clearly, John M. She turned it over. The inscription on the back read, "Camp School No. 4. 4 pupils present, 1 waiting." That night she dreamed of the mountain. She stood before the sealed mine, its boards black with age. A voice whispered from within, not threatening but pleading, "Tell her I remember." When she woke, she found soot on her hands. Over the following weeks, she began researching the history of Dunlow Hollow. No records remained of the collapse. Even the county archives listed the file as missing, but in a forgotten ledger she found a signature, Jonathan M. Alden, teacher. The ink had bled over time, but beneath it, in fainter pencil, another name had been added, John Miller. The letters intertwined, one flowing into the other, as though written by the same hand. Evelyn pressed her fingers to the page. The paper was warm. That night, she took the photograph home. She told herself it was only for study, but the longer it sat on her desk, the more it seemed to fill the room. The shadows deepened. The air thickened with the faint scent of coal and chalk. She tried to look away, but the boy's eyes, steady, gray, ancient, held her still. When she finally turned off the lamp, she heard the sound again. Chalk on wood, slow, careful, writing. She whispered into the dark, "What do you want?" For a moment, silence. Then a child's voice, almost kind. To finish, she lit the lamp. The photograph lay where she had left it, but the writing on the slate had changed. It no longer said John M. It said, "Home." Her breath caught. She backed away, the chair scraping against the floor. The air around her seemed to pulse, softly, steadily, like a heartbeat beneath the floorboards. And then, everything went still. The next morning, her colleagues found her desk empty. The photograph was gone. Only her notebook remained open, a final line written in her hand. He wasn't haunting the photograph. The photograph was haunting us. Below it, faint chalk dust formed a single word. Listen. Time erases everything. Names, faces, voices, but not the way silence feels when it stays behind. Dunlow Hollow no longer exists on any map. The land was bought by a mining company in the 1940s, then abandoned when the veins dried up. The river changed course. The road vanished under forest and snow. But if one stands on the ridge at dusk, when the fog begins to settle, the air still hums faintly, like breath trapped in the earth. And sometimes, if the light is right, a faint outline appears in that fog. A small wooden building with 4 windows and a crooked roof. For a moment it looks whole again, before fading back into the mist. It was on such a night that a stranger appeared in the valley. His name has been forgotten, or maybe it was never known. Some say he was a researcher, others that he was simply lost. He carried only a satchel, a lantern, and a folded photograph. He found what was left of the foundation by chance. The stones were half buried under moss, cold to the touch. When he set his lantern down, the light reflected faintly off something in the soil, a small shard of glass, curved and thin. He brushed away the dirt and saw that it was a fragment of a camera lens. Beneath it, another object glinted. He pulled it free. A slate, broken clean across the center. One half was blank. On the other, a single word remained in white dust. Listen. He turned it over. On the back, carved deep enough to cut the stone, were the letters JM. The wind rose suddenly, carrying with it the scent of smoke and old wood. The lantern flame bent sideways. For a moment, the stranger thought he heard voices, soft, distant, the murmur of children reciting their lessons. He stepped back, staring into the darkness, and then he saw them. 4 small figures seated at a desk, barely visible in the lantern's flicker. Their faces were blurred, their hands folded. The one nearest him, the smallest, lifted his head. The light caught his eyes. They were not eyes of a photograph. They were gray, deep, and alive. The boy raised his slate slowly, as if it weighed more than stone. On it, written in perfect chalk, was the name that had taken a century to finish, John Miller. The letters were trembling, but they were whole. The boy looked at him for a long time, then lowered the slate. The light dimmed. The figures dissolved like dust in the wind. The stranger fell to his knees. The air was heavy, pressing against his chest. He whispered the name once, quietly, just to see if it would carry. John Miller. The mountain exhaled. The trees shivered. Somewhere deep below, the sound of dripping water echoed like slow applause. When he rose, the snow had stopped. The moonlight poured gently across the ruins, turning the stones silver. The slate lay on the ground again, unbroken, untouched. But the word was gone. Only a faint smudge of chalk remained. He took the slate and left the valley before dawn. No one ever knew his name. Years later, a photograph surfaced in a private collection in Pittsburgh. Its origin was unknown. It showed a man standing before a small, half-collapsed schoolhouse in the snow, his lantern glowing faintly in his hand. But behind him, in the window of the ruin, 4 shapes could be seen. 4 children, sitting quietly, waiting. At the bottom of the photograph, in handwriting that no expert could identify, one line was written. He finished his lesson. The collector who purchased the image said the handwriting seemed to fade over time, as if it didn't want to be read. By the following spring, only one word remained visible: home. And maybe that's all this story ever was: a long way home. A teacher who could not leave, a mother who could not rest, a boy who could not speak his own name until the silence itself taught him how, a photograph that refused to die until someone remembered what it meant to be seen. Somewhere, in a forgotten archive, a file remains open, its pages blank but for a single note written in the margin. Certain images do not end when they fade. They wait for the right eyes to find them again. And perhaps that is the true purpose of memory, to let what was lost speak once more, even if only in a whisper. The photograph of the mining camp schoolroom was never officially found again, but some say, on cold nights, when the wind carries the smell of coal and chalk, you can still hear the faint scratch of slate against wood, spelling out a name that no longer belongs to anyone alive. J-O-H-N, then nothing, only the sound of the mountain breathing. And somewhere far away in the heart of that silence, the story continues to tell itself. Because stories like this don't end, they simply wait. They wait for someone to listen. And if you've listened this far, you've heard more than a story. You've heard what silence leaves behind. If you want to hear more forgotten voices, remember to subscribe to Veilside Stories. There's another tale waiting for you right now, already appearing on your screen.